They told me not to ride out of Calder's Crossing with her, and the man who told me hardest was the same one who just refused to sell her a sack of flour. His name was Prout, and he kept the only store worth the name in that dust-blown town, and when the young woman laid her coin on his counter, he pushed it back across the wood like it was something that might bite him. I was standing by his shelf of cartridges, counting out my own order for the long haul south, and I watched her stand there in the doorway light with her chin level and her hand flat on that coin, and I watched her decide not to beg. "We don't trade with your kind," Prout said. "Move along before there's trouble." She moved along. She picked up the coin, turned on her heel, and walked back out into the white morning without a word, and the bell over the door gave a small dead ring behind her. There were 4 or 5 men loafing on the porch, and they made a low sound as she passed, the sound a pack makes when it has decided something is weaker than it is. One of them said something I won't repeat. She didn't slow and she didn't hurry, and that was the first thing I ever knew about Sella, that she would not give a cruel man the satisfaction of seeing her run. I was 41 years old that summer, and I'd been alone 11 of them. I'd buried a wife named Hannah and a boy who never got a chance to be named, both of them inside the same hard week of a fever that came up the river and went through our little place like a grass fire. And after that, I sold the place for what a grieving man gets, which is next to nothing, and I went on to the road and I stayed there. I freighted. I guided. I took wagons and pack strings down the long overland route from the crossing to the green settlements in the Verde, 200 miles of country that would kill a careless man 6 different ways, and I did it alone, because alone was the only company I could stand. I'd have told you my heart was buried back on that river with the 2 of them. I believed it. A man can believe a thing for 11 years and still be wrong. I finished my trade with Prout and didn't say my piece, because saying your piece in a town like that buys you nothing but a long memory in small men, and I had a wagon loaded and a string of good horses and a road to make before the water holes started going dry. But I carried the look of her out the door with me, and it sat wrong, the way a stone sits wrong in a boot. I found her at the edge of town where the road bent south past the last corral. She had a thin sorrel mare with a galled withers and a blanket roll and a rifle older than I was, and she was checking the mare's hooves the way a person does who knows that out here a horse's foot is worth more than gold. She heard me coming and she straightened, and the rifle was suddenly in her hands, not pointed at me, just held, the way you hold a door you can close fast. "I don't want trouble," I said. "Then you've come to the wrong country," she said. Her English was clean and a little formal, the English of a person who'd learned it from books and missions and not from loafers on a porch. "Or the wrong town." "That mare won't make 40 miles with that withers," I said, "let alone the road you're aiming at." "And how do you know the road I'm aiming at?" "There's only the one," I said. "South. Everybody on it's going the same place or running from the same one." She looked at me a long moment. She had a face that gave away exactly as much as she meant it to and not one thing more, and dark eyes that took my measure the way I'd take a horse's, looking for the lie in the stance. "I am going to the Verde," she said finally. "To my people. They were moved to the agency below the hollow 2 winters ago, and my sister with them, and I have been away, and now I am going back. I don't expect you to care." "I don't," I said, because it was near enough true to say. "But I'm going there too, with a loaded wagon and 4 good horses and a barrel of water and 2 rifles that shoot straight. And you're going on a galled mare with no flour because a man in town wouldn't sell to you." "I have water." "You have a canteen," I said. "There's a stretch past the saltgrass, 3 days out, where the holes are bitter or dry by July. Men die on it every summer who had a canteen." She didn't argue the point, which told me she knew it was so. The proud ones who don't know the country argue. The ones who know it just go quiet and figure. "You're offering to take me," she said. It wasn't quite a question. There was suspicion under it like a knife under a blanket, and I didn't blame her for it. A man on an empty road offering an Indian woman his protection, she'd have been a fool not to wonder what I meant to charge for it, and she was nobody's fool. "I'm offering a trade," I said, "and I want to set that down plain because of all the things I did right and wrong in my long life. The way I said that next part was the rightest. I don't know that country half as well as a man my age ought to. The waters moved. The Apache bands knew where every seep and tank in those breaks was, going back further than my grandfather, and I'm a white freighter who learned it the hard way and forgot half of it. You get me to the Verd on the safe water, and I'll know I'll make it. In trade you ride in my outfit. You eat my flour. My guns are between you and whatever's out there. And when we get where we're going, we're square, and you go your way and I go mine, and neither one of us owes the other a thing." I watched her weigh it. I want you to understand she was not weak, and she was not waiting to be saved. She had crossed worse than that road, I'd learn, on her own 2 feet. What she was weighing was whether a strange white man was worth the risk of riding beside, and that's a sum a woman in her place had every reason to add up careful and twice. "And if I say no," she said, "you'll ride off and forget me by the second hill." "I'll ride off," I agreed. "I don't know about forgetting." Something moved at the back of her eyes then, not a smile, nothing so soft as that, but the first small loosening of a thing held tight. She looked at her galled mare. She looked at my wagon and my water barrel and the long white road south. And she made her choice with her eyes open, which is the only way she ever made one. "My name is Sella," she said. "Caleb Mercer," I said. "You'll keep your guns to yourself, Caleb Mercer," she said, "and your hands and your opinions about my people, or I'll take my chances with the dry holes. Those are my terms." "Those are fair terms," I said, and we shook on it like 2 men closing a deal, because that is what it was, and we left Calder's Crossing within the hour with the sun climbing and the town at our backs and not one soul to wave us off. The first day taught me she'd been telling the truth about knowing the country, and the second day taught me she'd been modest. We'd gone maybe 9 miles when she put up a hand and I hauled the team down without thinking, the way you do when a person beside you has earned that much, though I couldn't have said yet that she had. She slid off the wagon seat and walked out into the brush and crouched and studied the ground and came back and said, "3 riders this morning going south slow. Shod horses. One of them favoring the off 4. "Could be anybody," I said. "Could be," she said, "but nobody honest rides 3 abreast on a road this narrow unless they don't care who sees them coming, and they're letting a lame horse slow them, which means they expect to trade up for a better one soon." She climbed back onto the seat. "Drive on, but keep the rifles where you can reach them and don't camp where the firelight shows." I'd been on that road a dozen times and I'd have driven right over those tracks and never read a word of them. I drove on, and I kept the rifles close, and that night I built the fire down in a wash where it couldn't be seen from the high ground, and I didn't tell her I was doing it because she'd told me to. A man's got his pride, and most of it is foolishness. She doctored the team that night without my asking. I'd a near horse that had been off its feed for a week, and I'd figured it for old age, and she ran her hands down its legs and pressed at the jaw and looked in the mouth, and said the tooth was bad and showed me, and floated the edge of it down with a rasp from her own roll, gentle, talking low to the animal the whole time in words I didn't know, and by morning the horse ate like it was 3 years old. She doctored her own mare's withers with a poultice of something she dug at the wash's edge, a plant I'd have called a weed, and the swelling went down overnight. I'd spent my whole life around stock, and she knew things about it I'd never even known there were to know. I'll be honest about how I was at first, because the honesty is the whole point of telling it. I watched her like a man watches a coiled rope, half expecting it to be a snake. 11 years alone makes a fellow that way, and the times made him worse. There'd been blood between her people and mine all up and down that country, raids and reprisals, and the long, ugly business of the army pushing the bands onto the agencies, and a man absorbs the fear of his neighbors whether he means to or not. The first night I lay awake with my hand near my rifle, and I'm ashamed of it now. I lay there listening to her breathe across the dead fire, and I told myself, I was a fool to trust her and a bigger fool not to. And somewhere in the middle of that argument I fell asleep, and when I woke the sun was up and my horses were watered and she had coffee going, and she handed me a cup without a word, and the cup of it was the start of the rest of my life, though I didn't have the sense to know it. "You snore," she said, "like a bull in a bog." "You could have ridden off in the night," I said, "took a horse and gone." "I could have," she agreed, "but you have the water and I gave my word, and besides—" She looked at me over the rim of her cup, and there it was again, that loosening that wasn't yet a smile. "Besides, then who would I have to insult in the mornings?" That was the second thing I learned about Sella, that under the chin she held so level there was a wit dry as the saltgrass, and she'd let you see it exactly as fast as you earned it and not a day sooner. The dry stretch came on the fourth day, the way she'd warned. We climbed up out of the breaks onto a flat white country where the grass grew gray, and the heat came off the ground in sheets you could see, and the first water hole I'd always used was a cracked gray pan with a dead coyote in the middle of it, and the second, a mile on, was no better. I felt the old cold come into my belly that the dry country puts there. I had perhaps 2 days of barrel water for the team if I rationed hard, and the team was the thing. A man can walk, but a man with a dead team in that country is a dead man with extra steps. I started doing the arithmetic of fear, the kind that ends with a shallow grave. Sella watched the white flat with her eyes half shut against the glare and said, "Turn east at the lone juniper." "There's nothing east," I said. "I've been by here 10 times, it's flat to the edge of the earth." "There's nothing east that a man on the road would see," she said. "Turn at the juniper." I turned at the juniper. I wanted understood that I turned my whole loaded outfit off the only road I knew, on the word of a woman I'd known 4 days, into a flat white country that every map and every memory I had told me was empty. And I did it because somewhere in those 4 days I had started, without deciding to believe her. We went east 2 miles, 3, and the cold in my belly got worse, and then the ground dipped, so gentle you'd never see it from the road, a long shallow swale, and at the bottom of it, behind a fold no eye would catch, there was a stand of green, real green, in all that gray, and under the green a tank of stone with water in it, cool and sweet, fed from somewhere underground, a place her people had known and used for 100 years and more and never marked. Because the way you keep a thing in that country is by not marking it. We watered the team till their bellies swelled, and we filled the barrel, and we filled every vessel I had. And I sat down in the green shade and I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in I couldn't tell you how long. And she sat across from me and watched me laugh with her head a little to one side like I was a curious sort of animal. "You doubted me," she said. "I did," I said. "Until you nearly died of it." "Until I nearly died of it," I agreed, and she laughed then too, finally, a low warm sound, and I tell you the truth, that swale was the prettiest place I'd seen in 11 years, and it was not on account of the water. We laid over a day at that tank to spare the team the heat, and it was there in the green that the road first started turning into something other than a road. She told me about her people that day, not all at once, but in pieces, the way you'd pay out a rope you weren't sure would hold. Her mother had been a healer. That was where the hands came from, the floating of the bad tooth, the poultice. Her father had died young. There'd been a sister, older, named. I'll set down only that she had a name, and that Sella said it the way you say a name you're afraid you'll come back too late to use. The bands had been hunted hard through the years of her growing up and finally gathered onto the agency below the Verd Hollow. And Sella, who'd been off being schooled by a Quaker missionary woman who thought she was doing right and had not been entirely wrong, had come back to find her people fenced and counted and her mother in a grave and her sister waiting. And she had set out to reach that sister with a galled mare and an old rifle because there was no one left to do it for her, and she would not ask. "And you," she said when she'd paid out that much rope, "you ride alone. A man your age rides alone, there's a story under it." So I paid out my rope to match. I told her about the river place and about Hannah and about the boy with no name and the fever and the week, and I found I could tell it to her in a way I had never told it to a living soul, maybe because she had her own grave waiting at the end of her road and knew the weight of one without my having to explain it. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't reach over and pat my hand the way town people do, making your grief into a thing they get to handle. She just listened with that level chin, and when I was done she said, "Then we are both going to see people we love and people we have lost. That's a good thing to do a hard road for." "It is," I said. "You'll feel them less after," she said. "Not gone, less heavy. The dead like to be visited. They grow restless if you stay away too long and they make you carry them. Go to them and they let you set them down a while." She said it plain, like it was a fact about the country, the way she'd said turn east at the Juniper, and the strange thing is it was true. I'd carried Hannah and the boy 11 years, and that night by the stone tank, telling her, I set them down a while, and it was the first easy night I'd slept since the river. The river crossing nearly killed us both, and it was her that saw us through it, and I've never since let a man tell me in my hearing that a woman is the weaker thing. The Owl Creek ran low most of the year, an easy ford, but a storm had walked through the high country to the west the night before, and we came to the crossing in the early morning to find it brown and boiling, twice its banks, hauling whole trees down it sideways. I'd a delivery date and a notion of myself as a man who made his dates, and I looked at that water and I figured it was dropping, and I figured the team could take it, and Sella said, "No." "It's already dropping," I said. "It's dropping a hand an hour," she said. "It'll be safe by noon. You want to cross it now because you're a man who's used to deciding things, and the water doesn't care what you're used to." I crossed it now. God forgive me, I was 11 years stubborn and 4 days softened, and the softening hadn't reached deep enough yet, and I put the team into that brown water against her plain good sense, and we were 2/3 across when a cottonwood, the size of a church beam, came down the current and took the lead horse's broadside and rolled the wagon, and the world turned to brown roar and cold. I came up tangled in harness with a horse screaming and the wagon on its side and the water filling my boots and pulling me down, and I want to tell you I saved myself with my own strong arm, but that would be a lie. What happened is that Sella, who'd been thrown clear, did not swim for the safe bank the way any sensible creature would. She caught the trailing picket rope where it had snagged on a snag of rock, and she wrapped it twice around her arm, and she came back into that killing water hand over hand toward a drowning man she'd known 4 days and owed exactly nothing. And she got her knife, off her own belt, to the harness that was drowning me and cut me loose of the dead weight of it. And she shoved me bodily toward the rope and screamed at me in 2 languages to climb it, and I climbed it, and she climbed it behind me. And we hauled out on the gravel bar and lay there heaving like landed fish, while the brown water tried to take the wagon on downstream and didn't quite. I lost a horse that day. I will carry that. But I'd have lost myself and the rest in her too if she hadn't had the cold nerve to do the thing that wasn't sensible, and when we'd got our wind back. Lying on that bar with the sky wheeling overhead, I turned my head and looked at her, and she turned her head and looked at me, soaked through, her hair down out of its braid and plastered to her face, and I said the truest and stupidest thing I've ever said in my life, which was, "You should have let me drown, would have served me right." And she said, "I considered it." And then she laughed, that low warm sound, lying flat on her back on the gravel with the river still trying to take everything we owned, and I laughed too, and something broke open in me that had been closed since the river took Hannah. Some door I'd nailed shut and forgotten was a door at all, and through it came a feeling I hadn't let myself have in so long I'd half forgot the shape of it. We salvaged the wagon at noon, when the water had dropped just as she'd said it would, hand by hand by hand. We dried the flour that could be dried and threw out what couldn't. We doctored the team, and she doctored a long gash on my forearm I hadn't even felt, cleaning it with the same gentle hands she'd used on the bad tooth, talking low, and I sat there, and let a person tend me for the first time in 11 years and did not pull away. "You'll have a scar," she said, tying it off. "I've got worse ones," I said. "I know," she said, and she didn't mean the arm, and we both knew it. And I think that was the moment, if you made me name one, the moment the road stopped being a road. There wasn't a kiss in it. There wasn't a word of love spoke. That came later, and it came careful, the way everything between us came. Two proud people from two wronged peoples paying out rope an inch at a time. There was just her hands on the scar I'd carried 11 years, and her saying "I know," and the river going down, and the long road south still ahead of us with all its teeth. The three riders found us on the saltgrass. She'd read them right at the start, of course. They were horse thieves and worse, the kind that worked the overland road taking outfits from travelers too few to fight back, and they weren't above leaving no witnesses, and a lone freighter and an Indian woman were about the easiest pickings a man of that stripe could pray for. They'd been shadowing us since the second day, hanging back at the edge of sight, waiting for the country to wear us down to where we'd be no trouble to take. The river had nearly done their work for them. They figured us finished. They came in at dusk on the flats, 3 of them, riding easy and grinning, the way men grin who have decided you're already theirs, and the one in front had a lame off-for horse he meant to trade up for one of mine. I want to tell this part careful, because I've heard 100 stories where the lone white man guns down the bad men and stands tall over the bodies, and that is not what happened, and the not happening of it is the thing I'm proudest of. Sella saw them first. She always saw everything first, and she didn't reach for her rifle. She put her hand on my arm, the same hand, and she said low and fast, 3 of them, 2 guns we can count on, and the dark coming. We don't win a fight. We win by not having one. Do exactly what I say. So we didn't ford up and we didn't run. We let them come, and when they were close she stood up beside the wagon in the last light, plain in the open, and she called out to them, not in fear, not in English, but in a high, clear, carrying voice in her own tongue, the way a person calls across a canyon, and she called it 3 times, turning to the 4 quarters as she did, and the sound of it ran out across the flat in the dusk and came back off the far breaks like there were others answering. The lead thief pulled up. "What's she doing?" one of them said. The unease was already in his voice. There is a particular fear in a man who has done evil on stolen land, the fear that the land has noticed, and her voice in the dusk had reached straight down into it. "She's calling her people," I said, loud and easy, like a man holding a winning hand. "Her band winters in the Verd and they range these breaks all summer, and there's a war party of them within signal of here, and she just told them where we are and how many you are. You can wait for them if you like, or you can take that lame horse of yours and ride and live to be old men, and I won't say I saw your faces." It was a bluff. There was no war party. There was a woman with a clear voice and a man with a steady one and a country full of echoes and shadows, and the guilt of 3 men who knew what they'd come to do. But a bluff is only a bluff if it isn't true enough to be true, and every piece of that one was true except the only piece that mattered, and the dusk, and the echo, and her people's long, deep claim on that ground that those 3 men felt in their guilty bones, made even that piece feel true. The lead thief sat his lame horse a long moment, and his hand hovered, and I had my own hand on my rifle and my heart going like the river, and then he spat to the side and wheeled his horse, and the 3 of them rode off into the dark the way they'd come, fast, the way men ride who have felt the land notice them. We sat up all night with the rifles after that, of course, in case the bluff wore off and they came back bolder. They didn't, but it was that night, sitting back to back against the wagon wheel with the cold stars over us and the rifles across our knees, that she told me the rest of it, the part she'd held back longest. Her sister, at the agency, was sick. Word had come to her in the spring, the way word travels among scattered people, hand to hand. The sister was sick and the agency doctor was a drunk who wouldn't cross the room for an Indian, and the people had no healer since her mother died, and Sella, who had her mother's hands, was the only one left who might do anything, and that was why she rode a galled mare 200 miles against every danger in the country. Not for a reunion, for a life. She'd been racing the whole way, and she'd never once let me see her hurry, because she would not give the road the satisfaction. "You should have told me at the start," I said. "I'd have pushed harder." "If I'd told you at the start," she said, "you'd have known how much I needed you, and I'd promised myself I'd never need a white man for anything as long as I lived." And now, she was quiet a while. Back to back, I felt her breathe. "Now," she said, "I think there is a difference between needing a man and choosing one. I did not need you, Caleb Mercer. I'd have crossed that country on my own feet if the mare died, and you know it because you've watched me. But somewhere back at the stone tank I started choosing you, and that is a thing I never gave anybody the chance to be, and it frightens me worse than the river did." I didn't have a fine answer. I'm not a financier man. So I told her the plain true one. I said, I had my heart in a grave on a river 11 years, and I'd made my peace to keep it there. And then a woman who wouldn't beg a small man for a sack of flour walked out a store door with her chin up, and I've been digging it up ever since, against my own good sense, the same way I turned east off the only road I knew. I don't need you either, Sella. I made it 11 years alone, and I could make it 11 more. But I don't want to. And that's the bigger thing and the truer one, and I've never said it to a living soul, and I'm saying it to your back in the dark because I haven't the nerve to say it to your face. She didn't turn around, but she reached back in the dark, and she found my hand on the cold rifle stock, and she covered it with hers, the healer's hand, and we sat like that the rest of the night while the stars wheeled, two people who had chosen, finally, with their eyes open. And the dawn came up gray and gentle over the saltgrass, and we hitched the team and drove on toward the green. We came down into the Verd Hollow on the 11th day. You came over a last gray rise expecting more gray, and instead the world fell away green below you, a long valley with a real river through it, cottonwoods gone gold at the tips with the turning year, grass to horse's belly, and away off down at the gray, ugly cluster of the agency building sitting on the green like a scab on a healing arm. I felt her go tight as a drawn bow beside me on the seat. We were close now, and close, after 200 miles, is the hardest part of any road. The agency was a low place and a sad one, and I'll not dwell on it, because dwelling on the cruelty of it would be its own kind of trespass, and Sella's people are not mine to make a spectacle of. I'll say only that they had been a free people wrangling a free country within the span of one woman's memory, and now they were counted and fenced and fed on weevily flour by men who despised them. And they bore it with a dignity that shamed every white face in that valley, including my own. I'll say that the agent was a fat, indifferent man who looked at Sella's past papers. She'd had them all along, the Quaker woman's doing, with the same expression Prout had pushed her coin back with, and that he'd have turned her away too if her papers hadn't been in better order than his own conscience. And I'll say that her sister was alive. She was alive and burning with the fever and gone down to bones, in a brush shelter at the edge of the agency ground because the sickness had frightened the others off, tended by an old woman too old to be frightened of anything. Sella went down on her knees beside her sister and said the name I won't write, and the sister's eyes opened, and the two of them looked at each other across 2 years and 200 miles, and I had to walk off away and look at the river, because a man should not watch everything. Then Sella got up, and she was the healer her mother had been, and she went to work. I'll not pretend I understood the half of it, the plants she sent the old woman for, the way she brought the fever down by inches over 3 days and 3 nights, the things she did with water in her hands and her low, steady voice that the agency doctor in his bottle had never troubled to learn. I did the only thing I was fit for, which was to make myself useful. I freighted clean water from the good spring up the valley because the agency well was foul. I traded my flour, my real flour, the flour Prout had refused to sell her, to the people there, and I traded it square at a fair price, which made me about the only white man in that valley who had, and I felt the eyes of her people on me the whole time, weighing, the way she'd weighed me in the road at the start. I'd come into their country with their daughter beside me, and they had every reason under heaven to wonder what I'd charged her for the passage, and I knew the only answer that would do was the slow one, the showing, not the saying. So I showed. I hauled water. I traded fair. I kept my guns to myself and my hands and my opinions just as she'd told me to at the start, and I waited. The fever broke on the third night. The sister would live. And the morning after, an old man came to find me where I was greasing my wagon axles, an old man with a face like the country itself, and he was one of those the others listened to, and he stood and looked at me a long while with eyes that had seen the whole sad history of that valley written across them, and then he spoke, slow, in careful English of his own. "My granddaughter says you turned off the road at the Juniper," he said. "On her word, a white man, off the only road he knew." "I did," I said. "And at the river she came back for you." "She did, I'd be dead else." He nodded slow. "Men come into this valley to take," he said. "Land, horses, our children to their schools, water from our well. They have taken for so long that we have forgotten the shape of a man who comes to give." He looked at my wagon, near empty now of the flour I'd traded fair, and at the water barrel I'd filled and emptied for his people 3 times over. "You came to give," he said. It was not a question. It was a verdict, and I understood that the old man was the closest thing that valley had to a judge, and that I had just been judged and acquitted, and that the acquittal had cost me nothing but the doing of right, which is the cheapest coin there is and the one men spend least. "I came to bring her home," I said. "That was the trade. We're square now. She's home. I'll be moving on." The old man looked at me for a long moment, and there was something almost like pity in it. The pity an old man feels for a younger one who has gotten all the way to the truth and stopped 1 step short. "Is that what you want?" he said. And I found I could not answer him, because the honest answer was no. And a man does not say no to that question to a girl's grandfather unless he means the rest of it, all of it, the whole long weight of it, and I had not let myself know until that exact moment that I did. I'll tell the end of it the way it happened, which was quiet, because the big things in a life are nearly always quiet, and only the small things make noise. I packed my wagon to go. I no call to stay. The trade was done, she was home, her sister was mending, her people had taken her back into the fold of them where she belonged, and a white freighter hanging about an Apache agency with notions in his head was a thing that ended badly for everyone in those days, and I knew it. So I packed, and I hitched, and I went to find her to say goodbye, which I'd told myself I could do clean and would. She was at the river with her sister, who could sit up now in the gold morning light, the 2 of them with their heads together, and when Sella saw me coming with my hat in my hand and my wagon hitched behind me, she stood, and she came up the bank to meet me, and she stopped a little ways off, and we stood there, the 2 of us, with 200 miles behind us and the whole of the rest of our lives hanging in the gold air between us, undecided. "You're leaving," she said. "That was the trade," I said. "I keep my trades." "Yes," she said. "You do. It's the first thing I knew about you that you'd keep it." She looked at the river a while. Then she looked at me level, the chin level, and she said, "My grandfather says there is a piece of ground up the valley, above the agency line where the good spring is. Free ground. The kind a man could file on, or a woman, or a man and a woman together, where the river's clean and the grass is good, and a person could run horses and doctor them and live between the agency and the towns, belonging wholly to neither, which is a hard place to live but an honest one." She paused. "He says my mother's people would not turn from such a place, nor such a pair if the man had shown himself over a long hard road to be a man who gives. He says you have shown it." I stood there with my hat in my hand. "That's your grandfather talking," I said carefully, because I had to be careful, I had to be sure. I would not have her choosing me out of gratitude or her people's blessing or anything but the one true reason. "What does Sella say?" And she crossed the last of the ground between us. The ground I'd not had the nerve to cross myself. The way she'd come back across the river when sense said don't. and she put her healer's hand flat against my chest over the heart I'd kept 11 years in a grave and dug up mile by mile on the long road south, and she said, "Sella says she chose you at the stone tank before she knew she had. Sella says she does not need you and never will, and that is exactly why she can have you freely, as a free woman gives a free thing. Sella says the road was supposed to bring her home, and it did, and then it kept going one more mile and brought her somewhere she never thought a woman like her would get to go." Her eyes were wet and her chin was still level, both at once, which I have never seen another soul on this earth manage. "Stay, Caleb Mercer," she said. "Unhitch the team, we are home." So I unhitched the team. I am an old man now, telling this from a porch up the valley above the agency line, on free ground by the good spring, where the river runs clean and the grass comes to a horse's belly, and the cottonwoods go gold every fall like they did that first year. We filed on it together, which the law of that day didn't rightly know how to allow, so we made the law learn. We ran horses, and Sella doctored them, and she doctored people too, her own and mine and any that came, with her mother's hands, until there were folks in 3 counties of both colors who'd ride a day to fetch her for a sick child, and the agency doctor drank himself off and was not replaced and was not missed. We raised children on this ground who belonged wholly to neither the agency nor the towns, just as her grandfather said, which was a hard place to raise them and an honest one, and they grew up straight and they grew up proud, and they had her chin, every one of them, level as a rifle and twice as steady. Prude at Calder's Crossing went broke and sold out and was forgotten, which is the only revenge the cruel ever truly get, the slow one, and I'm glad I never wasted a bullet or a word on him. The 3 thieves I never saw again, and I like to think they died old and afraid in their beds, having felt once on the saltgrass that the land was watching and never quite shaken it off. I set Hannah and the boy down on that long road, and I visited their graves on the river a time or two over the years, and Sella was right. The way she was right about the water and the river and the men. The dead grow less heavy when you go to them, and I carry them light now. With the gratitude of a man who loved twice in one life, and was a fool to think one love uses up the room for another. There's room. There was always room. It just took 200 miles of hard country to walk me to it. She's down by the river this morning, gray now, like me, her braid gone silver, her hands gone slow but not slower than they need to be, talking low to a colt the way she talked to my near horse the second night out when she floated the bad tooth, and I first began, against my will and my grief and my whole hard history, to believe her. In a while she'll come up the bank, level chin and wet eyes both at once, and she'll say something dry to insult me, and I'll laugh, and that will be the day, the same as 10,000 days before it, on the free ground by the good spring at the end of the long road that was supposed to bring her home and brought us both to one. I rode that country alone 11 years and would have told you my heart was buried for good. I'd have been wrong. A man can be wrong about a thing for a long time and still, if he's got the sense to turn east off the only road he knows when a good woman tells him to, find the green he didn't believe was there. Turn at the juniper. That's the whole of what I learned in a long life. When the road you know is taking you nowhere but dry, and somebody you've started to trust says turn, turn. The watcher's there. It always was. Her people knew it 100 years before I did and never marked it, because the way you keep a thing in this country is by not making noise about it. So I'll not make noise about it. I'll just sit here on the porch in the gold morning and wait for her to come up the bank and be home.